The number 5 Clemson Tigers are heading to number 21 Wake Forest Demon Deacons, 12 p.m. noon kickoff on ABC. Right now, the Deeks are a 7-point underdog and are getting 7 points into the game. But according to the matchup predictor to ESPN's, Clemson is a 78.9% chance of winning the game. I'm looking forward to it. Can Clemson go 4-0? Can they get a big ranked win over Wake Forest and a big road win inside their conference? Houston, tell us what your thoughts are when we're previewing this game.
Yeah, and I mean, everybody is kind of waiting with bated breath this week because this is the first real challenge, and everybody's worried and defense and all that kind of stuff like that. I think what it boils down to is the matchups that you see. And yes, there are some areas on this defense that Clemson might be exposed in at certain points. If you give Sam Hartman time, they've got a very talented wide receiving core that you've got to keep keep track of because they can score. They can move up and down the field. But I think what determines this game is the line of scrimmage. That's been the case basically since Dabo Swinney took over. That's been the case long before then with Tommy Bowden. I think the last 32 meetings Wake Forest has been able to cover, but even in those games, there's been a lot that have been just not close. There's only been one in the last 13 years, 13 meetings that's gotten to one score, and that was in 2011 when you had a team that was reeling from losses, a loss to Georgia Tech and everything. I think this is still a mismatch, and this isn't against Wake Forest. I think they're a good team, and I think when they play teams like North Carolina or even NC State, they're going to be able to move the ball and score, but it's such a different ball game when you're dealing with a team that could be getting, if not all of their defensive linemen back this week. You could have the potential of seeing Xavier Thomas, Brian Brzee, Tyler Davis, and Miles Murphy, a quartet of players that have not been together, but only for 24 snaps in the last, however often, 3 or 4 years, 24 snaps. Those have been the guys that have been on the field. And you're going to have a full strength defensive line. We're still waiting to hear. It doesn't sound like Makuba and Jones are going to be back. So there is going to be some potential mismatches in the secondary. But at the same time, Sam Hartman is not going to have the time that he probably wants if Clemson's able to bring pressure on them this week, especially when you got, on top of that, Barrett Carter, Trenton Simpson, Jeremiah Trotter. The linebacking core is there, and that's what's going to be the key. And even on the offensive side of the ball, the offensive line is gaining confidence. They're getting better week to week. The defensive line and linebacking core for Wake Forest is a bit suspect. If Clemson's able to control the ball, run it, keep what they've been able to do and gain confidence, getting Will Shipley, Kobe Pace, Maffa, and DJ able to run the ball, that's going to bring them up, and that's going to create opportunities to throw it. And I think that's ultimately been the case every year since Dabo's been, there, regardless of coordinators or anything. They've been able to do that. And I think, although it might be closer for some, I think they're going to be able to do that tomorrow as well.
I don't think the two teams have really changed that much since last season. I think the biggest thing that's changing is the location of the game. But to me, that doesn't give Wake Forest 14 more points back. They lost by 21 points in Death Valley. And really going into the fourth quarter, I believe it was 38-10 or 38-13. So those last couple of points or those last two touchdowns were really kind of in the fourth quarter when the game was out of hand. So I don't feel like that the Wake Forest Demon Deacons can keep it close, especially not for the spread to be 7 points. I think you take that 7 point to cover for Clemson all day, every day in this kind of matchup, especially when just last season they beat them by 21 points, and the teams really are very similar. As you mentioned, you look at their defensive line for the Clemson Tigers. You've got Brian Brzee, who is expected to return. Xavier Thomas, when Dabo Swinney was asked about it, he's kind of perked up and smiled. He didn't say for sure one way or another, but he seemed like he was getting closer and closer. And as you mentioned, if all four of them are on the line at the same time, it doesn't really go well for Wake Forest. When I was at the game in Death Valley, that was the thing that I really realized is the offensive line for Wake Forest has not all of a sudden become 6'8" and 300 pounds. They still are undersized compared to Clemson's defensive front. And you can see it when they line up head to head. Yes, Wake Forest can definitely play. They can definitely score a lot of points. They're going to put up a lot of yards. Sam Hartman, as Mickey Plyler said on the radio, Sam Hartman is going to throw for 300 yards. That's for sure. We know that. We feel that that's going to happen, but they're still not going to keep it within 7 because the offensive line, the line of scrimmage where it's won and lost, is going to be lost by Wake Forest because Clemson's defensive line is just way too strong. They're going to overpower them from the start, and it's going to slowly wear away. And I think you take Clemson, again, all day, every day. A lot of people are talking about the quarterback play. Obviously, you have Sam Hartman. I think that he could do really well. DJ, statistically didn't do great, but on the offensive side, Clemson found their playmakers. Kobe Pace had almost a 200-yard rushing game last year. Will Shipley had over 100 yards rushing, and Bo Collins had, I think, 137 yards receiving on just 4 receptions. So they found 3 big-time playmakers in that game and were able to exploit the Wake Forest defense. I really feel like, why can't they do the same thing again? They have the same players in place, plus a couple of more, including a guy that I really want to see more of, which is Antonio Williams. He's electric, and a guy I know you're big on, Houston, Adam Randall.
Yes, I think when you start to pile those up, especially when you have the types of players like Williams and Randall, that I think they're going to come into being and be really, really good in the future. I think it's starting to stack up against that Wake Forest defensive front. And you hear my daughter crying in the back. So you start to stack those against Wake Forest. I think that could be a real problem come Saturday. That's why I'm picking Clemson to win 38-20.
38-20. Now, oddshark.com has 35-26 as the predicted computer score there. They're saying to pick the -7. The spread right now, population is picking 83%. So the under and over right now, 55.5. Houston, it seems like most people are picking the over. 98% are picking the over at 55.5. Would you do the same?
Life's too short to bet the under.
Well, I definitely think that you go with Clemson. I don't know about the specific score. Really haven't thought about it. But to me, I feel like, how can you not be okay with -7, considering what they did last year and relatively same rosters going into this year? So I am hitting hard Clemson. I think the Tigers are going to come away with a win. They're going to be 4-0, and they're going to have a key win against the previous Atlantic Division champions. A good start into what Mickey likes to say is the actual season, because we just played the preseason, but really it's the second quarter, of the season. So you're really getting past your 25% of the season's already done, Houston, after 3 games. It's crazy. We're already 3 games into it. Obviously, again, too, Houston, I want to ask you this. Is there any concern about looking ahead? Because, as you know, there's a team coming up after this that is called the Wolfpack, the North Carolina State Wolfpack. I want it to be a big-time revenge game. Is there any concern there?
No, I think this is the first time they have their full attention on Wake. They can't take it off. This is a ranked opponent. You can't be caught looking forward to NC State as far as that goes. I think they've got their full attention. I think this team is still looking to improve week to week. Even though they've won by a larger margin, scored more points, the offense does look better. Everybody still seems to be, passing on Clemson. So I really don't think there's going to be any look ahead. I think they're fully focused on Wake Forest.
Now, the Wake Forest side of things are concerned about their special teams. I believe they've had a couple of bad snaps. They've had a blocked punt. They've had some return issues and allowing good yardage on the opponent there, or the opponent to start from a better position on average. So they're really kind of struggling in special teams. I think that adds up well for Clemson, because Clemson has seen coming off of the Louisiana Tech game that they had, some good special teams and turnovers. So I feel like, and then you got the 2 block punts that Clemson has had as well. So I feel like that there could be some special teams play there for the Tigers. Do you think so?
Potentially. Second in the nation in block kicks. You got 2 block punts and a blocked field goal. And honestly, it would have, if that blocked field goal hadn't have been fumbled, what kind of outcome on the game would that have had? Would we be complaining as much? if that had affected the score of the game, especially at halftime. I think that's definitely a possibility. I think there's a sign this year that Clemson's more aggressive in blocking kicks and maybe putting a little bit more emphasis on their special teams game. Thank you so much. That would be awesome to see. And look, if you're struggling with that, that's going to be something that's on film. I wouldn't be surprised if they bring the pressure a little bit, at least on one, maybe 2 punts this week, and at least on definitely on kicks.
And the biggest thing that Wake Forest does is the slow mesh. A lot of the Wake Forest fans are now saying, you know what, Clemson has our number with that. Maybe we should do something different. I don't think that they have the ability to completely change that, because that's kind of their bread and butter. That's part of their DNA on offense. Why do you think Clemson is so successful with that? And is there any way that Wake can use that against them?
I mean, it's popped off a couple times on Clemson before, but the problem is, you're able to run this on lesser defensive fronts that don't have 4- and 5-star athletes. You can pull that off against a lot of different teams in the ACC, top to bottom. Even the way Florida State's going, if you're undisciplined or if you're just not a 5-star Alabama type. But the problem is when you start going up against teams that have the caliber of defensive talent in the front seven like Clemson does, you don't have guys that are afraid to just hit both the quarterback and the running back. And that's basically what it boils down to. You have someone who can be a disruptor to whatever read you're making. They're taking that read away and just saying, you're reading me, buddy, and I'm going to blow this up. It doesn't matter who you're reading if you've got one guy that has the ability to just destroy that entire play. And that's why it's been an issue since Dave Clawson's been there. I think it's a creative wrinkle, but unless you have the guys to be able to pull it off, against a defensive front like that, it's always going to be an issue. Now, hey, look, if Dave Clawson one day goes to, I don't know, I'm just throwing out some Ohio State, right? Not saying he would. I'm just saying if you're able to pull those in, then it might work. I think it's a creative wrinkle. It just doesn't quite work when you're dealing with that much pressure coming from Clemson.
A lot of fans out there worried about how Wes Goodwin did, or the lack of success against Louisiana Tech. Do you think that was an anomaly there, or do you think that that's really a concern that's starting to bubble its head here? You're looking at Clemson, most of the yards against the Clemson defense, 83% from the passing game, heading into a game where Wake Forest is going to pass all over you. Concern there about Wes Goodwin and how he calls plays against the pass?
I don't necessarily think that it's about play calling or anything. I think they're still bringing pressure. You saw last week, he's got the ability to shift things around. Clemson dropped into a 3-3-5 last week. And so they conceded that this team is going to throw the ball all around the field. That's a lot of what Louisiana Tech does. And then that offense, there are short passes that are basically run plays to get out and in and everything. And their whole game thing is you're going to get yardage. You also have injuries. If you're without Jones and Makuba, there's going to be opportunities to get on Clemson, but can you maximize those? It's not necessarily how many yards you get, is can you score on the defense? And I know that some of that has been aided by turnovers, which that might be created by pressure. You can't always rely on turnovers for your defense when you want to be really good. But at the same time, they've been able to create some issues once teams get into the red zone. And so the way that I look at it is, you may be giving up some yards. You may have some situations tomorrow where you get to the red zone, but if you hold them out, that's still a win. If you hold them to field goals as opposed to touchdowns, that's a win. You also have to think about, you've been injured on the defensive front for the last 2 weeks. You get everybody back. And what's that going to look like? Because you think about the Georgia Tech game, we had a pretty healthy offensive or defensive front, and they were able to control that. They gave up some yards and stuff like that, but for the most part, it was pretty well controlled from start to finish on the defensive line side of things, and I think that could be the case. We don't know. Who knows? Nothing's ever guaranteed, but I think when you have as many guys that Clemson has on its defensive front, it's just going to be hard for Wake Forest to just keep taking their shots without having some major issues.
12 p.m., Truist Field, 77 degrees. Again, Clemson is a 7-point favorite here. So we will see what happens tomorrow at lunchtime time. I'm looking forward to it. I know you are as well. Hey, what do you think about the Clemson versus Wake Forest game? Put it in the comments. And if you haven't already, why haven't you? Why haven't you hit the like button? Why haven't you subscribed? You know, myself and Houston, we hold up the YouTube channel here on the Morgan Thomas Show. And also, we do our show every Thursday night on the Roar 105.5 and 97.5 The Roar. We are your place for Clemson information and for Clemson videos on YouTube. So make sure you like and subscribe.